Hello friends and welcome. My name is Kari and today I am sharing with you how to transform your favorite cookie recipe into a 100% whole grain einkorn cookie that, dare I say, is even tastier than the original. So let's get into it. Whole grain einkorn flour is the perfect starter whole grain flour to start baking with because in many cases you can use it cup for cup just as you would all-purpose flour. However, because einkorn flour does absorb moisture a little bit less than your typical all-purpose flour, you might have to adjust some of your recipes. So that's what I'm going to show you today. I'm not going to convince you to try my favorite cookie recipe because let's face it, everyone has their own preference when it comes to cookies. But I'm going to show you how I transformed my favorite cookie recipe into a 100% whole grain cookie packed with wonderful nutrients and still all of the flavor that you could want. So I will leave this recipe down in the description box for you in case you want to try it out. It's a sourdough recipe that I've just altered a little bit. So when you're going to use einkorn flour, you will find in some cookie instances like shortbreads where the extra moisture content by using the einkorn flour just doesn't result in the end product that you want. It might be a little bit too wet of a dough. So how do you transform the recipe? It's very simple. We're going to take our butter and we're going to reduce the moisture content by about 15 to 25% in that butter by browning the butter. This essentially takes out all of that extra liquid, and it only takes 5 or 10 minutes to brown your butter enough that you've now reduced the entire moisture level in your recipe. So depending on the type of butter you have, it'll take 5 to 10 minutes. Just keep an eye on it. Just set it on a medium-low heat until you get nice and brown and you can smell the aroma and you can hear the moisture has evaporated out of that butter. And we're going to weigh the butter before and after to see the difference. So this was 180 grams, now we're about to 138. So that is just over 20% of moisture loss. Now, I always err on the side of browning it a little bit more as opposed to less because you can always add a little bit of extra water in case you've browned it a little bit too long and you need a little bit more moisture. So always err on the side of caution and just brown it for an extra minute or two just in case. And you can always add an extra couple of grams of water just to help get you to that point that you need, whether it's 15% or 20%. So that should cover your basis for any cookie recipe. Your shortbreads, your thumbprints, your cutout cookies, chocolate chip cookies, any of your recipes, they're really going to have butter in them, or they will have another liquid that you can reduce by 15 to 20%. So this might be something like eggs. That is another one that you can do. Instead of doing an entire egg, you could do just the egg yolk, which has fat and protein in it, enough that it will still work out in your recipe. So keep that as a rule of thumb that if you don't want to brown the butter, and again, I mean, who doesn't want a browned butter cookie? That is just my personal favorite way to enjoy a chocolate chip cookie. But again, if you don't want to go through the extra step of browning your butter, the eggs are also an option if your recipe has eggs in them. You just don't want to drop the eggs too much because you do need that extra fat and protein in the recipe to help get the end result that you want. Now, just as a side note to working with einkorn that I didn't mention in a previous video, einkorn is a wonderful flour for reduced sugar baked goods. So that's kind of a mouthful. But I like to make things like breakfast muffins that are not made with sugar but sweetened instead naturally with bananas. So I do a whole grain einkorn muffin recipe sweetened with only bananas. But you would never know because einkorn, strangely enough, tastes similar to corn. So it actually has a sweet undertone to the flour, unlike regular all-purpose flour, which lends itself beautifully to baked goods where you're reducing the sugar content. So if you're like me and you like to play around with reducing the sugar content in some of your baked goods to make them a little bit more healthy but still flavorful and enjoyable to eat, this recipe here that I'm making is sourdough and whole grain, and yet when my family members eat it or friends eat it, they have no idea that it's either sourdough or 100% whole grain. And when I told them, they were kind of baffled, like, what? This can't be whole grain. It is. It's that easy, it's that simple, and it actually gives itself such a depth of flavor that you otherwise wouldn't get with your average cookie. So between the sourdough, between the browned butter flavor, and now the einkorn, which adds a whole nother dimension of flavor, these are my personal favorite, and they might become your favorite too, in whatever version of cookie is your favorite. The only thing I would caution you against when trying to incorporate more einkorn products into your baking is to stick with the products that don't have to have a bulk rise, like your sandwich breads or any of like your sourdough breads that you're trying to get a big rise out of, like you're doubling it in size, because einkorn has a very weak gluten structure compared to all-purpose flour. And it is because it's not a hybridized wheat. That's why they consider it one of those ancient grains, because it's not been hybridized. And because of that, it doesn't have the gluten necessary to give it that big bulk rise that you need to get like a sandwich loaf. You could still do it, and in fact I have done it, but you need to alter the recipe quite a bit to get the result and the rise that you desire in your end bread product. So as I had mentioned in my previous video, anything that doesn't need a huge rise, that doesn't have to double, will work for this recipe. So any quick breads will do just fine. And again, most of the time you don't even have to do this little alteration of reducing the moisture content. And that's the beauty of einkorn, is it's so simple and it still is considered the whole grain. You're getting the bran, you're getting the fiber, you're getting all those extra nutrients, so you can actually enjoy your cookies a little bit more than usual. These still have sugar in them, of course, so I'm not going to tout them as a quote healthy cookie, although I do not spare myself from eating one or two, or maybe even three. And just in case you're wondering, I did let the sourdough dough sit on my counter for 6 hours before rolling them into 45-gram sized balls and baking them in the oven. I like to underbake mine by about a minute or two, because I'm weird like that. Like I said, everyone's got their own preferences, right? So you take your favorite cookie and use this little tip of browning the butter to reduce the moisture content by 15 to 20%, and you will have one of the best, hands down cookies, especially whole grain cookies, that you have likely ever tried. If you have worked with einkorn before and you love it just as much as I do, or not, leave a comment down below so that everyone else can see what are your favorite recipes. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.